So welcome everyone to Women Who Code Boston. Tonight's event is Crafting Your Engineering Career Story. It's going to be a great one. I just have a few notes for you before we really get started. Everyone should be muted already. I don't think you have a way of speaking right now, but just in case, I don't know, check your settings. If you have any questions throughout the evening, please use the Q&A feature. It should be part of your window somewhere at the bottom. That's where I will go through your questions, and then we'll answer those probably towards the end. A slide deck will also be sent out through Meetup after the event. We are also recording this event tonight. So if you want to remain anonymous, you can turn off your camera and just update your name to just like your first name or even no name if you'd like. We may also take some screenshots tonight. Okay, so welcome again. So it's really awesome to see you all while we're in isolation, and we are very excited to have Shayna come and talk to us tonight. So a little bit about Women Who Code Boston, or Women Who Code in general. Our mission is to inspire women to excel in technology careers. Women Who Code is a global nonprofit. We have chapters all over the world, and Boston is actually one of the bigger ones. So our vision is a world where women are represented as technical executives, founders, VCs, board members, and software engineers. Basically, this means we want to see women represented in all areas in tech. So a little bit about the Boston network. We have almost 6,000 members, which is really exciting. Every month we have 2 to 4 events for different topics and different areas in tech. They're all free, and this includes Tech Talks and Social Nights, which we have every month. We have study groups, panels and workshops, and in general, we're very focused on community and networking, and we love seeing you all in person or online. And if you have any questions about how we operate or about our events, please let us know. So there's 3 of us here from the leadership team. There's myself, I'm Melissa, Shayna, who is our speaker tonight, and Indira. We are all directors for the Boston chapter. So if you have any questions for us about the chapter or Women Who Code, please let us know. Okay, so if you go to womenwhocode.com, we actually have a bunch of resources for people who join the group officially. So this is not the meetup group, but the actual like Women Who Code organization. These are some great benefits that come with being a part of the group. So there are a bunch of resources for learning coding and and leadership and all this other stuff. And there's also a global community, like I said, we have chapters all over the world. It's a great way to connect with other people. There's a job board, and there are definitely opportunities for free tickets or scholarships to different conferences and events all around the world. And then there's also opportunities to recognize other people in the industry. A little bit about our code of conduct. Our events are open to anyone who support our mission, and we are an inclusive community, and we just ask that everyone be respectful at our events. And please read through our code of conduct, which is also like on our event page on Meetup and our website. And here's a link to it. Should be pretty easy to remember, womenwhocode.com/code of conduct. Should you experience any issues, please talk to one of us directors. All right, so just one more quick thing. We do have a couple events coming up for later this month. One of them will be the Tech Talks and Social Night. That is not this month, in May, about a month from now. We also have a couple of algorithms sessions coming up as well. Please stay tuned for those announcements. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Shayna.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'm super excited to talk about this topic. This is something that's very exciting to me and really important in this time. Really appreciate you all. I know there's probably a million other things you could be doing, watching Netflix or hanging out with your loved ones. So thanks for taking the time to be here tonight and take some time for you. And I really hope that this will help you think a little bit more holistically about your career story. So I'm gonna just go through very briefly the agenda for this evening. Throughout the talk, I'll be pausing for questions, but if you have anything, you can just put it in the Q&A, and Melissa and Indira are gonna be sort of monitoring that as well as the chat throughout the talk. The first part of the conversation is talking a little bit about your why you're here, why are you looking for a job, why are you in the role that you're in, or why are you looking at the roles that you're interested in. The second part is going to be talking about framing your search. So this is actually doing some pre-work around organizing your search. In the third part of the talk, we're going to talk about your resume. So getting really tactical into how do you create a good developer resume, what are some do's and don'ts, and what should you avoid. And then finally, we're going to go through the behavioral interview. So unfortunately tonight, we're not going to have time to talk about coding interviews. That could be another 2 hours of talking. However, we do, as Melissa mentioned, have a number of events that we run through Women Who Code Boston and several other Women Who Code networks across the world run practice sessions for coding interviews. So if that's something you're looking to learn about, definitely stay tuned. And then finally, at the end, we'll open it up for question and answer. And I'm pretty much an open book, so feel free to ask whatever questions you have. So before we get started, I just want to share a little bit about myself. So I am originally from the greater Boston area, born and raised. I wasn't always in technology, so my background was in the social sciences. My undergraduate degree was in linguistics and psychology. And I worked in a number of different roles immediately after university. So I worked in project management and customer support. And I actually came into tech in 2014 through a coding bootcamp. So I have a very different perspective than some of you have on the sort of career story. But I've been really fortunate to be able to talk to a lot of people about their career stories and how they got into the roles that they're in. So I've tried to incorporate all of that into my talk. I am a full stack software engineer and tech lead at a company called Pluralsight. We're a tech skills platform and located here in the Boston area. I'm also a director along with Indira and Melissa for Women Who Code. And I'm also a coding instructor, so I teach coding classes in a number of organizations throughout the area. So again, want to do a quick shout out for Women Who Code. If this is your first event, welcome. We're so happy to have you. And we're going to continue having these online events even past COVID time. We're so excited by the response we've gotten for online events. So we really want to continue to do online events in the future. So a couple disclaimers. This presentation contains many of my own opinions based on my own personal experience. So they may differ from your experience or from the experience of other people you know, and that's okay. But I've also done a lot of research. So I've spent a lot of time looking at best practices, blogs, courses, getting feedback from recruiters and others in the industry. I also want to add the disclaimer that this presentation goes over the process of applying to developer jobs in US companies specifically. So if you're looking to apply for a developer job in another country, the process might be a little bit different. So you definitely want to look into that if you're looking to apply in, say, Europe. Part one of our conversation I mentioned is getting a little existential. So when we were searching for a job, it's really easy to get caught up in the mechanics of the search, sending a million emails, reaching out to people, creeping on LinkedIn, just applying to all the jobs that you can find. And this is a really strange time right now to be looking for a job. Most people have not conducted a job search during a pandemic before. So I want to allow you give yourself a little bit of compassion when you think about the job search, and especially if you're having a hard time right now. Let's focus on your why. So the way that I like to think about this is thinking about why you're here and how do you want to approach the job search process. So maybe you're in a role that's just not working for you. Maybe you're in a role that's working for you, but you kind of see something on the horizon. Maybe you were laid off, or maybe you're coming back into the field after some time away, or maybe you just graduated. Maybe you just came out of a boot camp or university. There are so many reasons why you might be looking for a job right now, and there's so many reasons how you got to this point in time. So what I really want to encourage you to do is think about your personal narrative. So we hear a lot about this word narrative, and what is it really? This is your personal story. This is your whole history, both your work history and your education history and your personal history that has brought you to this point in time. So some helpful questions as you consider your personal narrative are, what experiences in your life, professional and otherwise, have brought you to this place? What are you most proud of? What are the things that you feel most excited about that you can bring to the table? What makes you different? What makes you unique on your team, among your friends, among your family? What makes you different or special? What gives you energy? Specifically, what kind of tasks make you excited, make you lose track of time? What aspects of previous jobs or roles did you not enjoy? What were things that made you, drained you of energy? And this is a hard one for a lot of people, especially right now. But what does your life look like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? If you were unencumbered by the day-to-day, what would your life look like? And then this is another one. This is probably one of my favorite ones. If you could be paid $1 million per year to do any job, what would it be? It doesn't have to just be in tech. It could be anything. So as you're answering these questions, I encourage you to see if there's a pattern in the sort of themes that arise. This pattern is really important because this is part of what makes you uniquely you. One of the things that I really like is this idea that your career is not just a trajectory up. I think a lot of times people feel pressure, especially as they move from job to job, that their title has to increase and their salary has to increase. I mean, hopefully your salary increases, but that there's this very sort of linear path to the top. And that's actually not true for the majority of people, and especially in tech. So I really like this quote. It's been attributed to Sheryl Sandberg, but I don't actually have an attribution for it, about your career being a jungle gym, not a ladder. So sometimes you take a role that you're not sure about. Sometimes you dabble in something that you don't like, and that's okay, because these things aren't permanent. And so even if you're in a position where you feel like you have to take a job because of life circumstances or money or whatever, just remember that it's okay and it's not forever. Okay, this is the part where we start getting a little tactical. So the first part of organizing your job search and taking that narrative that we just thought about and sort of feeding it into your job is doing this pre-work. This is the framing of your job search. I want you to take a moment to visualize your ideal role or employer. And as you consider roles, as you're looking on job boards or talking to people, start to write them down, write down answers for these types of questions. What do you want your day-to-day work to look like? Are you doing front end? Are you doing back end? Are you equally comfortable in both? Are you pair programming? Are you mob programming? Are you building new features? Are you fixing bugs? Are you doing test automation? Like, think really specifically about the kind of tasks that you enjoy in previous roles, or you think you might enjoy if you're moving into tech for the first time. Consider the type and the size of the company. In difficult times, often, especially right now, there's a lot of layoffs happening at startups in different companies, industries that are maybe a little less stable in a recession. But think about, if you can choose, what would be your ideal size or type of company? Would it be a SaaS product, an agency building websites for people, a little tiny startup, or a big multinational company? Also, does the industry matter to you? If you're working on a product, how invested do you want to be in the product? Do you want to work in education, healthcare? These are all important things to consider. Also think about your future teammates. How would you be working with them? Would you be working largely alone? Would you be working very collaboratively with them? And then also, it's really important to consider your needs. At the end of the day, you're working so that you can make money. So let's think about, what do you need in terms of your salary, your benefits, your perks, your work-life balance? These are things that vary over the course of your career, but think really carefully about those as you go into your search. It's also really important to have a do not want list. These are things that are absolute deal breakers. These are things that no matter how much money you're offered, you won't do them. Have that list. It's really, really helpful. This is an example of a rubric. So as you think about these different attributes of companies and how you fit into potentially a given company, this is an example of like a really simple rubric activity that you can do. So you can see on the left, these are all kind of categories of things that maybe you care about. So work-life balance, having a diverse team, having a short commute, and then assigning them a weight. So, you know, maybe work-life balance is really important for you right now and having a short commute is less important. Take all these attributes and evaluate your current or most recent company, and then use this rubric to assess your future potential companies as well. And this will give you a really good idea of whether a company might be a good fit for you. Now, the #1 job search tip is to make connections. You want to make connections with other humans that are at the companies that you're applying for. So obviously, it's very preferable to make connections in real life. In the current situation, it's a little bit more challenging to do this, but a lot of the things that we used to do in real life are starting to happen online. So these are things like tech meetups, career fairs, even conferences, and even volunteering. So if you're interested in doing any of those kind of things normally that you would be doing in person, a lot of those things are online, and those are all really great ways to contact people. There's the phrase ABN, always be networking. Even if you meet someone in an Uber, right, and you have a conversation with them, you never know what that person might be connected to or who they might be working for. So just always have that mindset when you're out and about. More specific to connecting with people online is social media. Twitter is actually a really great place to connect with people, especially within the developer community. Creative forums like YouTube, Medium, different blogging forums, really, really great way to connect with people. Another interesting approach is to become a power user of a product. So if there's a product that you really care about and you would really like to work for their company, become a really good user of that product. Offer to do product testing, give them feedback. You never know how you can make a connection. And then finally, forums, places like Reddit or other forums where you can interact with other people that are in the role that you're in or that you would like to be in. Another really important thing as you start to reach out to people is to make sure that your internet presence is exactly what you want it to be. So you want to make sure that you have a portfolio website. You want to be Googleable. Oftentimes when people get a resume or make a connection, the first thing they do is Google you. This is just a normal behavior. I think probably 10 years ago that might have been a little weird, but now that's just kind of how it goes. So you want to make sure that your internet presence is exactly the way that you want it. You want to have an active social media presence, especially having like a GitHub or a Stack Overflow profile is a really great way to show who you are as a tech person. You also want to make sure that your branding is consistent across all these sites. So try to use the same handle and the same picture across all these different media so that people can get a complete picture of you and know that it's you. And finally, make sure that you Google yourself on the regular. Set up a Google alert for your name if you don't have a very common name. If you have a common name, unfortunately, you're probably out of luck, but make sure that you're happy with the results when you Google yourself, because this is a very important part of the internet landscape and of just being online in general. So the next part is the writing part. And this is really hard, especially if you're a developer and you're not used to writing. It can be a little intimidating. So I'm going to try to break down this process in a way that feels hopefully a little bit more approachable for you. It's really important to think about a resume in terms of why. What is the point of a resume anyway? And a lot of times people think of a resume as just a historical record, a audit trail for you. But in fact, a resume is a customized story. A resume is a marketing document. And it is a history of your professional achievements, but it's written for a reader. It's not written for you, it's written for a reader. So the idea with a resume is that you really want it to be succinct and you want it to be readable. The goal is to show how you are the best match for the job that you're applying for or the company you're applying to. So it's very important to remember that it's not a history of everything that you've ever done. It's not a marketing document for the other companies you worked for. It's a very purposeful document to show how you map to this job that you want. So it's really important that your resume is relevant and you want to draw connections between your experience to the experience that the employer is looking for. Make it memorable, make it marketable. You don't want to use cliches or anything that can be construed as boring, because at the end of the day, you're kind of at the mercy of your reader's attention. So how do we do this? What do you include in a resume? And again, I want to stress that all of the tips in this section are going to be very specific to US companies. So if you're applying to a company in another country, you definitely want to check and read up on the standards for the resume process in that country. You want to include your contact info, so your email, phone, direct links to your GitHub, and if you have an online portfolio, and the city and the country that you're located in. This is really important. I can't tell you the number of times that I've seen resumes that don't include one of these pieces of information, and it looks just a little bit short-sighted. It looks like there's a question online here. Do you have any guidance as to when you should use a reader-designed resume versus a computer-designed resume? Can you tell me more? I guess a reader design would be like a physical document, or using a template. If you want to pop some more context in that chat, I'm going to keep going, but I will get back to your question. It's also really important to include all of the relevant professional experience with your dates and locations. So dates are really important, and I would say please always include the month. If you just include the year, it's really not clear to the reader how long you were actually there. You also want to include all of your education. So this includes higher education, any degrees that you've achieved, boot camps, or even coursework that you've done on your own, anything that's relevant to the role. I would not recommend including your high school unless that's your most recent level of education achieved. I would try to focus it in on sort of recency and relevance to the role. So it looks like this person's saying, LinkedIn, I made a computer design resume and it's in the doc format, whereas the human resume might have an objective and is in a 12-point font. Okay, good question. So yeah, so if you use LinkedIn, for example, to sort of port over your resume, it might look a little bit different than if a person made it. I'm actually going to go into a little bit about this. And yes, let's talk about plain text in just a minute. Another section that you'll want to include is relevant tech skills. In certifications, awards, things that are relevant to the role. So the rule of thumb here is if you can't write code in it on the spot, please don't include it in your resume, unless you want to include proficiency level. So it is acceptable, and people are doing this more and more, to list out their skills and then have either like a bar chart or stars or something to show like how proficient you are in a particular topic. That's okay. But if you just list all of the languages that you have ever worked in, with no sort of regard for the interviewer might ask me a question about this, you're kind of setting yourself up for a tricky situation. And again, yes, standards and practices may differ by country. So there's some things that are a maybe, and we're going to get into the design in a little bit. But one of the maybes is including a home address. So traditionally, people would include like their full home address in the resume. At least in tech, this is becoming a lot less common, and there's a number of reasons why you may or may not want to include your home address. The first one is discrimination. So socioeconomic discrimination is a very real thing, and it's helpful to include maybe the city and the state in which you live, but you might not want to include your address. So I would say that's totally your call. If obviously if the application requires your full home address, then you should include it, but I don't think you need to put it on your resume. Another important question is this construct of a summary or statement of intent or objective. So this is a blurb that goes at the top of the resume, usually like right below your contact information. Historically, people used to put an objective. So it would be, you know, something like, you know, it is my intention to apply to become a such and such a role in such and such an industry, and these are the skills that I bring. I don't see that so much on resumes anymore, and I think it's because a lot of times you're just restating the job post, and it's not actually providing the reader with a lot of information about you. So I think that the objective can be used effectively, especially if you're, for example, just out of school and you don't have a lot of other experience, and maybe you want to talk about like why you're applying to the job, and the kind of attitude that you're bringing to the job. But I would say overall, it's not necessary for a lot of people. You can also use a summary. So some people have like a a 2-sentence kind of tagline on LinkedIn that you could put on your resume. But for a lot of folks, it's not necessary. So this is a thing you can do some more reading on. There's definitely a lot of mixed opinions out there about it, but I don't think that you necessarily need it. Another question is volunteer work. I would say, you know, if you have the space on your resume and you feel that the volunteer work is pertinent and important, you can definitely include it. I think sometimes people get a little exhausted with the volunteer work and it becomes like kind of irrelevant really quickly. So I think, you know, use your judgment on that. If it's something that's directly related to the industry that you're applying to, then like by all means include it, but you don't necessarily need to include it. Another question you hear a lot is about education details. So should you include your GPA? The rule of thumb that I have heard is if you have above, some people say a 3, some people say a 3.5 out of 4, and you want to, you can. Some companies are very competitive about GPA. They might ask you specifically about it. A lot of tech companies are not looking at that GPA information, so it's kind of a judgment call for you. If you're proud of your GPA and you want to show it off, like by all means, go for it, but I don't think it's required. Also, the year of your graduation, if you have a degree, this is another one that can be really tricky. So if it's very recent or if it's a long time ago, both of those things can work for and against you, depending on your circumstance. If it's very recent, it can actually make people think that you're less experienced or qualified than you are. And if it's a long time ago, you can end up with ageism, right? People profiling you and assuming that you're old or out of touch because of your graduation year. So this is another judgment call on your part, and you're definitely not obligated to put it on your resume. Another question that we often hear is, should you list your education or your experience first? So if you are a very recent graduate, or if you just came out of a boot camp, or if you are transitioning industry and your other experience is not relevant to the job, I would say putting whatever education that you have that's relevant to the job is really important up top. So if you graduated from a boot camp, I would put that right at the top of the resume. If you have at least one position in the field or in your role, I would say try to put the experience first. But this is, again, a judgment call, and you can definitely Google. There's a million different thought pieces on how to do this well. People also ask, should I list like all the projects that I'm working on my resume? If you're looking for stuff to put on your resume, if you feel like it's a little light, I would say definitely do it. If you're just coming out of a boot camp, or if you don't have formal technical education, projects on your resume is a really, really great way to showcase that. There's all different ways you can do it. You can put like a list of your projects with like links to each of them. You could have like them listed as sort of experience with descriptions. You definitely don't need to do it if you already have several developer jobs under your belt, but it could be helpful depending on the role. Okay, so this gets back to the question that I'm seeing in the chat, which is fancy colors or graphic design. A lot of resume readers online are going to be looking for a free text or like a very simple format resume. I like Sam's idea that you maybe have 2 copies. So maybe you have one that is like a text file resume, right? That you need to put like feed into like an online thing. But maybe you have another one that you print out and you bring to the job interview, or you bring to the job fair, or you email to the person that you're chatting with. So I would say in general, resumes in tech are a lot less formal or like kind of stiff than in other industries. And I've seen like really wild, cool resumes with like infographics. And then I've seen other like extremely boring Times New Roman font. So this is a judgment call. I would also say it depends on the role that you're applying to. So if you are looking at like a UX job or anything that's kind of visually minded, you might want to make it a little bit cuter or a little bit fancier. But if you're like, a DBA, like, I don't know, the people reading your resume might be like, what are they spending all this time on the design? So you want the resume to reflect who you are as a person, right? If you pay someone to make a really, really, really slick resume and then you can never reproduce that in the wild, then that's probably not a great reading on what your capabilities are. So I would say invest in the content of the resume. There is a question in the chat I'm going to get to in 1 minute, Sarah. I want to include one more bit about hobbies and interests. This is another one that is up for debate. So some people like including their passion for bird watching or brewing beer on their resume. I would say overall, I've never found it to be super helpful one way or another. I mean, I think it makes you a little bit three-dimensional, but it also kind of takes away from the focus of your professional achievements. So I think it's a really great thing to sort of intersperse into your online persona, perhaps, or talk about in the interview when they inevitably ask you, like, what do you like to do for fun? But I don't think it's necessary to put it on the resume unless you really want to. And obviously, if the hobby is relevant to the job, then that's really a good thing to include. So Sarah's asking, do you have suggestions for how much job history you should include if they're all relevant to the kind of job you're looking for, but you've been in that industry for a while? That's a great question, Sarah. We're actually gonna get to that in like 2 slides. So hold me to it. Patricia is asking, how about a recent gap of employment? Would you proactively address and explain it or just not mention it, such as moving overseas and not having, not being able to work or having a child? This is a really great question. So a lot of people have gaps in their resume, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the overall tone on this has changed, right? Like in the past, if you had a gap in your resume, you had to add like consulting at home, something really vague, and you felt like you had to kind of fake it, which is, really inhumane, in my opinion, because lots of people have family lives, lots of people have, health things that they have to attend to, lots of people have visa issues. Like there's so many reasons why someone could have a gap in their resume, and that doesn't mean that they're a less qualified candidate. I think that most tech companies understand that. I would say you don't need to necessarily put it on your resume. You definitely want to be ready to talk about it in the interview or with the recruiter or whoever. The other thing you can do is if you have any like volunteer or side projects that you did during that time, for example, if you're contributing to open source software or like maintaining like some website for someone, like include that as first-class professional experience, because it's still relevant to the job, even though you weren't being paid for it. Okay, so there's some don'ts for your resume. The first don't is please don't include your picture on your resume. This is actually a standard in a lot of other countries, but in the US, that's not something that typically is done. So it's a little odd because, yeah, as soon as they Google you, they'll probably see your LinkedIn picture. But overall, please just don't put it on your resume. Also, please don't put your age, your gender, or your race on your resume. Obviously, there are ways that you can ascertain a person's age, gender, or race from looking at a resume, and there's lots of research about discrimination around this very topic that you can look up, but please don't explicitly list those items. Also, in some other countries, people will sometimes, countries outside of the US, people will sometimes list their primary school details. This is generally not advised or needed in the US. Also, please don't list, if you're looking for a developer job, please don't list Microsoft Word. The more skills you put on the resume doesn't mean that you're better qualified for the job. So you really want to focus the skills on, is this required for the job? The more skills you add, you're just going to lose the reader. So just be thoughtful. Please also don't include the names of references, like people on the resume. And you don't even need to include the references available upon request. A lot of companies don't check references anymore. This is kind of an old-timey thing, but if they want references, they'll ask you for them. All right. So we have another question in the chat here. For those with no work experience, can they put their internships and attachments? Yes, please. Actually, I should add that to that slide. Internships are really, really great, even if they're, 4 hours a week volunteer, whatever experience that you have that is in a professional environment or doing the work of someone who would be paid for the same thing is potentially relevant. And when you're just starting out, I know it's super hard because you're just trying to scrap together all the possible things that could count as experience, and it's all in how you sell it. So if it's even a little bit relevant to the role, definitely include it. Okay, 7 seconds. Everyone put it in the chat. What do you think happens in 7 seconds? What does this figure mean? Yes. How long the HR director looks at your resume. That's pretty horrifying. You spend all this time making this beautiful, perfect document, and they look at it for 7 seconds. So that's from an eye tracking study that was actually completed in 2018. And that's actually up from, I think it was 6 seconds before. So we're on an upward trend, but this is really important. So readability is really important. And if you are not a designer, you might actually have a hard time knowing what a readable resume looks like. So the #1 tip for readability is less is more. If you have a lot of experience, this is going to be the hardest thing for you, right? Most people in the US, their resume is going to be 1 page, unless they have 10 or more years in the field. So if you're principal, architect, director, VP level, maybe your page, you maybe have a 2-page resume, but in the US, you really want to try to keep it to 1 page. Just like an email, you want to have the important stuff at the top. You got that 7 seconds. So you want to make sure that whatever you want the reader to focus on is that top section. So that might be your recent experience, it might be your projects, it might be your education. That needs to go at the top. You also want to take care to denote your sections clearly. So you want to have some sort of visual breakage on the page, so it's not just like a wall of text that overwhelms the reader. And please use a professional modern font. Please don't use Times New Roman. There's so many good alternatives. Also, consistent formatting and white space. This goes a really long way to making a readable document. And save it as a PDF. Please don't send it as like a crazy file extension that no one can open. PDFs are great. They're almost universal. Save your name in the file name of the PDF. So if the recruiter saves it to their desktop, they can find it really quickly. And if you're feeling really like you don't have the design chops, you need help, there's a number of different templates that you can use out there for free. Even Google Docs has resume templates now, but you can also use a service like Canva is really cool. They have some really great visual design, like just pre-formatted resumes, or resume.io is another one. And that can really help you create a really beautiful resume. Like I said, you probably don't want to get too wild on the beautiful part, but it will help it make it a little bit more readable for folks. So for anyone who's raising their hand, I actually can't see hands. So if you want to just put your question either in the chat or the Q&A box, that would be wonderful. All right, so this goes back to Sarah's question. Someone was asking. Yes. What about what's relevant? What if you have too many things and you don't know what to do? So the best tip that I received is this idea of having a master list on your resume. So this is all of the jobs you've ever had. This is the laundry list version of your resume. And for each job, you want to include the essential details about where you worked, when you worked. You know, you can have some detail blocks. You can include things that are not necessarily relevant to tech jobs, but they might be relevant to something someday. If you were a barista team lead at Starbucks, you know, that could be a management, you know, how that can help you with your management role in the future. So there's so many different ways that you can take all of those elements of your personal story and weave them into your resume, and the master list is a great way to do it. So just get it all out. It's going to be ugly. That's okay. Just get it out there. Then what you want to do is you want to create a new resume for every role or company that you apply for. So now this seems unwieldy if you're applying for like 20 companies a week. So you might have to cut some corners on this, but I really like this paradigm, because what you do is you take the pieces of your master list that are relevant to the job that you're looking for and you tailor them. In this example, the person is applying for a front-end job and they worked front-end and back-end and all these other things. And so what they do is they take from their master list, you know, maybe they include the, you know, mid-level full stack job, but they change the description to really focus on the front-end aspects of that full stack job. And then they include their entry-level front-end job. And then maybe they also include their web design internship from college, or the volunteer maintenance of a nonprofit website where they do a bunch of, you know, CSS and JavaScript. So this is really helpful because you take all of this kind of mishmash of things and you turn it into a much more focused resume that maps really nicely to the work that they're looking to hire for. The same person might also apply to be a tech lead, and maybe the tech lead resume is a little different. So maybe for your tech lead resume, maybe in that front end job, you actually had a lot of leadership roles, even though you were a junior. Maybe you, you know, organized some initiatives around accessibility or testing or something like that, and you refocus, even though this is like a front end job, to highlight your leadership. Maybe on this resume, you even include your, you know, your team leadership in another industry. Like, there are so many different ways that you could potentially, I don't want to say swing, but basically take the experience from like a seemingly unrelated job and actually map it over to, especially around leadership, right? Like leadership, there's a lot of things about leadership that are not specific to tech. So that's actually a really, really important and important skill to get good at. So I'm gonna follow up. There's some questions here. Gwen, why is Times New Roman bad? That's my personal opinion. I just find it extremely dated. When I see Times New Roman on the web, I always think like, oh no, someone's style sheet isn't loading. So I personally think that sans serif fonts are easier to read. And if you want that serif font, you can use, you know, Gaudi or any of those sort of web safe fonts that are just a little bit more modern. The Google fonts are awesome. There's so many good Google fonts. Just gives you a little bit of an edge. It just makes you look a little more modern. Another question, since I'm in university still, I've had better luck listing my club activity than my non-related experience. That is a great point. Thank you for, I should add that to my slides too. Clubs and extracurriculars are really, really helpful. If you participate in hackathons or anything like that, or Women Who Code, please include those on your resume. Those are really, really important experiences that are definitely relevant to developer jobs. Larissa says, my perfect resume has lots of really good templates, including a plain text version, which is important for applicant tracking systems. That's a great tip. Once someone has created a resume using an online platform, which has its watermark probably positioned in the bottom, does that affect the selection criteria in any way? I'm not sure about that one. I would say if you can remove the watermark, it's probably better to. That's just my gut on that. I'm not a recruiter, so I don't 100% know, but I would say as much as you can make it look like you made it is probably better. All right, so we're at 6:51 Eastern time here. We have about halfway to go, but the second part of the presentation is a little bit faster. I really want to spend some time talking about what goes under each job. This is one of the hardest parts, I think, for developers. So I can't tell you the number of resumes I've seen with these words on them. Team player, hard worker, self-motivated, communication skills, problem-solving skills. And to those things I say, please stop. These words, will well-intentioned, tell me absolutely nothing about who you are as a person, because anyone can say they're a team player, anyone can say they're self-motivated, anyone can say they're good at communicating. When I'm looking at your resume or when I'm in an interview, I want to see how you're a hard worker. And that's a really, really important skill to think about as you write your resume. So Laszlo Bach, who was I believe a VP of engineering at Google, has this really wonderful article that goes over the XYZ paradigm for writing the thing that goes under the job title on your resume. And it's a little bit hard to unpack at first, but once you start doing it, it's actually kind of fun. So the main format of this is accomplish X as measured by Y by doing Z. So that sounds like a lot. So let's unpack that a little bit. So the X is your accomplishment. If you can, starting that bullet underneath your job title is, if you can start that with the accomplishment, it's very, very powerful. The why is, how do you, or we as a reader, know that you had that accomplishment? And the Z is, how did you do it? So I'm going to give you some examples. Worked on backend. So this might be like a bullet under your, senior backend developer, senior Java developer role. How about reduce load time by % by optimizing queries using framework? This is arguably much more specific than worked on backend. But what this shows me is that you are a data-driven person who cares about performance, who's clever. Maybe this framework is really cool. Maybe this framework matches the framework that my company is hiring someone to work in. This is way more compelling than this. Here's another one. Improved accessibility. This is a really important skill. How about improved app accessibility to achieve full AAA compliance through conducting a system-wide audit and delivering essential fixes? Just a little bit more specific, and all of a sudden this becomes really powerful. If you respond to a lot of bugs, maybe you're working on a legacy code base. Fix customers' issues. Proactively address customer issues and cut defects in half or whatever % by implementing a team-wide tech debt initiative. Implementing a team-wide tech debt initiative could literally be saying to your 3 other coworkers, hey, let's work on tech debt 4 times a month, right? That could be an initiative that you started. And all of this is about marketing. All of this is about reframing the things that you do in your day-to-day to be impressive. Another one, wrote automated tests. How about increase applications automated test coverage by % through refactoring and utilization of design pattern that you know that this company is excited about. So again, a lot of this is getting on the company's level and realizing that engineers are going to be reading this resume and coming up with ways to make your accomplishments more exciting. A lot of times you're like, I don't really know what %, or I don't know what the automated test coverage is. Your best guess is fine. Obviously, don't lie. Don't misrepresent your work. But the reality is, if you have a good idea of what it was, just include it. One more, won a hackathon. Achieve first place in a hackathon out of this number of participants by creating, you know, this type of app using these technologies that did this impressive thing. As you get into this, it can actually be really fun, and it can be really hard at first, but once you start doing it, it's almost like a game. So the number one thing, and I've experienced this, is like, help. I don't know what my accomplishments are. This is really hard. And just like in coding, when you're really stuck writing your resume, rubber duck. Talk to your cat, talk to your plant, or talk to your family member, your friend, your partner, your coworker. Just try to talk it out, because before you know it, the ideas will start coming. Another really great suggestion is from Julia Evans, who I adore. She has this great article called Writing a Brag Document, which is basically a log of every time you've been proud of something, you felt good about something, you got kudos for something. Just have a doc that you keep, put screenshots of like nice things people have said about you, keep a log of your, you know, most proud PRs that you merged. Like, just write it down in the moment, and then when it comes to do a resume, it's so much easier. This is another good article, and I'll be sending out these slides at the end of the presentation, but this is how to list accomplishments on your resume when you don't have very quantifiable work. So this article has some really helpful tips. So we have a question here. How do you frame working in a team? Does it diminish your accomplishments? For example, if you won a hackathon in a small team? No, I think that makes you more impressive, because most work is not done by yourself, right? Like, most things in the world are not created by one person. Most things are created by a team of people. So by working in a team and being successful in a team, you're showing that you have good communication skills, you're good at collaborating, you're good at being accountable for your work. Those are all things that are really, really important takeaways from working in a team. So I would argue, if your team won a hackathon, in a lot of ways, that speaks more about you as a candidate to work in a workplace with other people than if you worked on a hackathon by yourself. There's another question here on portfolios. Some people have asked for it, but I don't know what to include, because a lot of things I've done are back-end applications or processes that don't have a UI. Any suggestions? It's a great question. So that's a really hard thing to do. One thing I've seen that's really effective is to have like maybe a portfolio with summaries of things. I think depending on the kind of roles you're, like, if you are applying for jobs that specifically want like front-end work, you definitely want to try to include whatever front-end work that you have. But if you're applying for jobs where you're doing more back-end things, I think you could give yourself even like doing a mini case study on a project that you worked on. If you can talk about it, that could be a really compelling way to frame your story, probably anonymously, but you could say, like, you could have a little mini case study on your portfolio page. It's like, this was the problem, this is how we approached it, this is what we learned, this is a recommendation I would make for someone else approaching this problem. You could have a really great narrative on your personal website about that. There's also a question here, is it okay to list functions with accomplishments? Yes, you should definitely list your functions, but the point is that you want to list them in a way that is compelling and not just listing like worked on back end, worked on front end, wrote tests, right? You want to try to take those specific functions and reframe them as accomplishments as much as you can. Some of the things are not going to be accomplishments. Sometimes you're going to have a really sucky job where you're like, I didn't accomplish anything. I hate this place. I want to get out of here. That's okay. But if you can find other areas on your resume to highlight those accomplishments, those can kind of outweigh the areas where you feel like you have less accomplishments. How do you frame a temporary absence in the field? For example, you left somewhere and you went to work in civil society tech, and then you want to go back to the other place. I would say, again, this is my personal opinion, but I think it's actually not a disadvantage at all. I think that's an advantage. So you went off into another field or another company or another role, and you gained a whole bunch of other experience and skills that the people that stayed in that other industry probably don't have. So I think a lot of it is actually thinking about what you learned from your time in that other field and trying to quantify it, and then trying to map it to the original field where you want to go back to. So you might have to think a little bit creatively about it, but you can for sure, again, I don't want to say spin, but like you can for sure frame the work that you did in that other field as relevant. There's certainly patterns that I'm sure you can find. Someone says, one thing to keep in mind regarding teamwork is, well, it's great to share what the team accomplished. Make sure you highlight what you contributed. You don't simply want your resume to say, we. You need to speak to what you specifically did. Yeah, I think that's great. I think you can have a balance of that, right? And a lot of times when you're talking about teamwork, not everyone is equal on the team, right? So you're probably bringing specific skills to the team. So you can talk about the team's accomplishment, but you can also talk about the skills that you brought to that team to help them have those accomplishments. All right, we're doing good. Recap. So quantify everything. This is really important as much as you can. Try to think about, we're engineers, we like data, we like, things to be pretty clear usually. So as much as you can quantify your experience, it's really, really powerful. Remember that XYZ paradigm. Like I said, it's a little bit weird to start with, but it is really, really powerful. Please use action verbs. Please avoid those cliches. As soon as I see those cliches, my eyes just glaze over. It's really annoying. And please don't just list out endless frameworks and tools. List the frameworks and tools that are important to the role that you're applying for and use them in context. But please don't send a resume with the bottom third is just keywords. Please don't do that. This is a great Medium article from a software engineer at Google, talking a little bit more. He has a very great method about creating engineering resumes. One last note, cover letters. So a lot of people are like, why do I have to write a cover letter? So I would say this is becoming a lot less common. But if it says write a cover letter, please write a cover letter. Follow the instructions. It does not make a great impression if the company really wants you to write a cover letter and you don't do it and expect a call back. So just read the instructions. The point of the cover letter is to show the why behind your application. Now, if you've written a really good resume, your cover letter doesn't really need to be that strong. And I think that's why the tide towards cover letters is starting to change, especially in tech, is because people can create a compelling enough narrative on their resume alone that they might not need a cover letter. But if you must, you want to customize it to each role and company. Please don't copy a cover letter off the internet, because the recruiters will know because they read cover letters all day. So don't do it. Don't use boilerplate. It's just super tacky. You want to make it original. You want to make it interesting. You want to make it succinct. You don't need to write a 5-paragraph essay about yourself. Just quick. Just, have it punchy, have it interesting. Talk about what excites you about the job. Use in your own words, why are you excited? Think of it as kind of a counterpart to your resume, which might be a little bit more formal. Maybe your cover letter shows your personality a little bit more. You can, you write it in the first person. I think that's really the best approach. Someone's asking, does cover letter optional really mean it's optional? That is a super great question. And I would say it probably varies from company to company. If you really want the job, go for it. you know, take 2 hours, write a letter, write a love letter to the company. I would say if you don't care, then you could also try to talk to the recruiter if you are talking to a recruiter, or someone that works at the company. If you can find someone you can ask about it. I hate when companies do that. I think it's really unfair. Like, they should be explicit about what they want, what they don't want, because otherwise it's just like mind games. But yeah, if you're excited about the company, write them a really nice cover letter. Also, proofread your cover letter and have someone else that's good at writing proofread it for you. And please just don't repeat all the exact same information that's on your resume, because if the company wants a cover letter, they want it for a reason, which is that they want to understand your intention behind applying. And so please don't just repeat all the stuff that's already in your resume. Whew. All right. I want to pause for questions. We are at 5 minutes past the hour. I would say we have about 15 minutes left in the presentation, and then I'm going to open it up. I'm going to open up the floor for more questions, but I want to give you the opportunity to ask any other questions you have about the resume portion and the sort of pre-work portion of the talk. So a question here is, what do you recommend putting in a cover letter? Like I said, I think it's going to vary depending on the company. And I'm also going to say none of the engineers will read the cover letter. The cover letter is probably for the hiring manager and the recruiter. So the other people that are interviewing you in general, I mean, unless they have a very formal process, I would say overall probably aren't reading the cover letter. I would say, you know, talk about who you are and kind of broadly about what your experience is. Talk about why you're excited about the company. You could talk about how you learned about the opportunity. If you have a connection, you know, someone that connected you to the opportunity, that's a really helpful place to name drop. You want to make sure that in all of your messaging is like very consistent with your resume, but you also don't want to just like, you know, take the bullets and turn them into sentences. So it's a delicate dance. There's also a article, oops. This is a really helpful article from Forbes, writing a cover letter as a techie that would be probably helpful in guiding you on that. There's a question for, does the ATS read cover letters, or would that be reader-centric? I'm not sure what the ATS is. You can define that for me. I can try to answer your question, but I'm not sure. Oh, applicant tracking system. That I do not know. The robots. Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing the robots try to get all the data that they can get, but I can't actually answer that. I'm not sure. Should we send the files in Word format for automated tools or in PDF? I would defer to whatever the website says. They're usually pretty explicit. Yeah, I would say whatever the website says. Hopefully it says. PDFs are generally harder for machines to read, but they've also made a lot of advances in PDF technology, so it's probably safe, but yeah. I've heard that you should mention coding languages, technical skills as much as possible in the resume to be picked up by the ATS if this is true. Is this still true? And if so, do you have any suggestions for doing this while still sounding like a human? That's a great question. Yeah, so I know people used to like try to game this a lot. Like they would put a block of keywords in white font on a white background at the bottom of the resume. I think a lot of applicant tracking systems have gotten wise to that, and they probably, I'm guessing they don't look favorably on that. I'm not experienced with applicant tracking systems. I'm speaking purely as someone who reads resumes once they've gotten through the applicant tracking system. However, I would say definitely put the skills that are relevant to the job in context. Like, don't put, you know, knows how to knit. Like, you know, it's just you want to make it relevant. And I am guessing most of these applicant tracking systems use you know, mapping algorithms. So they're going to try to look at, are you a good candidate for the description as laid out in the post? So if you want to try to do some analysis on the frequency of given words in the post, you could try doing that and then tailoring your resume in that way. But yeah, I don't have a super great answer on this. I will say as a human, there's nothing worse than someone's resume when it's literally just like a list of skills and there's nothing else. That's not great. Any advice for people applying for their first job out of a boot camp? How should they talk about accomplishments with their personal when their personal and boot camp projects make up the majority of their experience section? That's great. I was in that situation. So when I was basically changing industries, I was 5-6 years out of university, and I was changing careers effectively. And even though my other career was kind of in and around tech, it wasn't directly applicable to being a software developer. So I would say the projects section can be a really, really compelling story to show how you learn and how you skill up and how you hustle. And you should definitely include your other professional experience if it is at all relevant. Like if you worked in tech support, or even if you ran social media or ran marketing, or literally anything that you've done with a computer is like fair game if you don't have other experience for like a developer job specifically. But I would say like definitely make sure that you can talk really well about those projects, talk about your technology choices, put a little bit on the resume and then have it link directly, like actually create a link in your PDF to your website. If you can have your projects up, that's so great. Like if you can put your project, the code on GitHub and have it deployed on Heroku or GitHub Pages or Glitch or any of those like free services, that's really cool, because then, I can look at the code, but like, does it work? It's really nice to be able to see what people have done, and people are so creative. The stuff that people are doing in boot camps is really amazing. So as much as you can showcase that on your resume is really powerful. Do you have good examples of how to present your projects on the resume? I don't have any offhand. I can try to look at some. I've seen some people that have done a number of different things. So you could have a section at the top called like, relevant experience that has projects. If you've contributed to like open source, like those are huge things, right? Because if you work with other people to create an application, that's what most people's jobs is, right? So that's relevant experience. So if you want to have a section that talks, especially at the top of your resume, that talks about like what your projects are, maybe you have like 2 or 3 that you're really excited about. You have the name, a little blurb, very small, but like, maybe some interesting things about it, and then a link to the project and a link to the GitHub code if you can. That would be really a great approach. All right. How important is it to have a personal website or portfolio as compared to other types of projects or works? This is a great question. Yeah, it's so funny. I think when I think about like portfolios, oftentimes portfolios are people that do a lot of visual work, right? They do graphic design or photography or video, or they're super front end whiz. But if you aren't in the habit of keeping up a personal website and you're like, oh, this is another thing I have to do while I'm searching for a job, I would say it's less important than having like a good GitHub potentially, or another place to showcase your work. You can also showcase your work on LinkedIn. You don't have to create a website. You can also use, there's a bunch of little, like you could do a Squarespace. I think it's really funny because I think a lot of times developers are like, oh man, I have to create like a, Gatsby website, or I want to like do this thing and, as cool and slick as possible. It's like, no, you can just, it doesn't really matter, because we're not trying to assess you, unless you want us to assess you on your portfolio, which is fine, like the actual creation of the portfolio. But I would say overall, it's more about the content. So however you want to showcase the content, whatever works for you makes sense. Do you have advice for what to include and what not to include on a personal website, personal information, photo, etc.? Yeah, I mean, I think you can totally have a photo of yourself, personal information. Your website is going to be much more casual than your resume. So, and also you can show the ways that you're human, right? Like you're not just a work machine, you're a person. So you can include those elements of your personality on your website. There's a really great website that has all these like portfolio inspo. It's a meta it's a meta portfolio of portfolios. I can try to find the link and send it out with the slides at the end of this. But yeah, I would say just use your judgment. No one's going to judge you negatively for talking about how much you love cats on your personal website. Like, and if they are, you probably don't want to work for them. So, all right, let's talk about it. So we've spent all of this time creating this written document, and now you have potentially a callback and someone's interested in hiring you. So in many ways, the process of creating all these written artifacts has teed you up perfectly for this moment. So before you interview at a company, you want to try to get the upper hand, right? At the end of the day, it's kind of a game. You want to find out as much as you can about the company before you go into the interview process. There's a couple different reasons for this. First of all, being prepared reflects well on you. It means that you care, it means you're a hard worker. But also, it's going to help you be less nervous, and it's going to help you be able to put your full self forward because you're going to already know all the context around the interview process. So find out whatever you can about the interview process. There's a million websites where you can go and find out, Glassdoor, Blind, a bunch of other places, what the interview process is. And the reality is, especially at big companies, it's not going to change a lot between people. Startup, it might be a little more, touch and go, but overall, try to find out as much as you can. If you talk to someone at the company, that's your best bet. So ask them what the interview process is. Find out who your interviewers are if you can. Find out who the reporting manager is if you can. Again, sometimes it's very opaque. Big companies like Google, like I don't even know how they place you. I don't know if there's like a sorting hat or something. But if you can, try to find out who the people are. And for extra brownie points, give them very specific questions about their roles without being creepy. But if you know that you're going to be interviewing with the head of architecture, and you know that this person is also like a really popular person in like the Python meetup community, be like, hey, I saw that you like did a presentation, on blah, blah, blah. Like that actually goes a really long way. And, there's a fine line between, creepy and doing your homework. But I think if someone is already known for something, like bring it out. Also find out as much as possible about the company, the product, and the business. I think a lot of times engineers like to sort of rest on their laurels that they can write really good code. But at the end of the day, you're coding for something. You're not just writing code to write code. So it's really helpful and it's really refreshing when an engineering candidate comes in and they already understand what the company does, why they exist, what their business is. If they can ask like intelligent questions about the competition, like hole in one. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in an interview where the person has done literally no research into what the company does, and it's really obvious and embarrassing. Also understand, who does the company serve? You're going to be building an application for them, or you're going to be creating websites for them. Try to understand for who. It's not just for the company, right? It's for their customer or their stakeholder. So try to understand who those people are. Literally just spend 15 minutes looking into it. You'll be such a better candidate. Try to find out as much as you can about the tech stack. Again, there's a million websites where you can Google and find out. If you can't figure it out, like try to find some of the company employees on LinkedIn and see if you can figure out what their skills are. That might be able to give you a little bit of a glimpse into what the tech stack is. Also on the tech stack, you don't have to know every single thing that they list in the job description or that they use at the company. Like you don't need to spend the whole weekend crunching to like learn a brand new language because it was the 5th language listed on the list. Like just be familiar that it exists and then go into that interview saying like, hey, I don't know Python, but I know Ruby, and like I'm super excited to learn Python. Also, you want to know the company culture and values. Companies are all about their cultures and their values, and they probably have a big about page that talks about them. So spend some time looking at that about page, really actually read it. Sometimes it can be like, okay, like buzzword city, but if you know some of those off the bat, that makes you a much more compelling candidate. Also be ready to make connections between this role that you're applying for and other roles that you've had. So if there's very specific connections that you can draw, like be ready for those. And then this is really important. This is one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever gotten. Know your walkaway number. So if you're getting an interview, that means there's a potential you might get an offer. And one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is not thinking about the money. You know, a lot of us are looking for jobs because we love to code, we're excited about the product, blah, 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 blah. But like at the end of the day, you're doing a service for a business that's making money off you, potentially. So you need to think about what are your requirements to have the kind of life that you want. And maybe you're willing to take a little less money for a job that you really want, or maybe your benefits are more important than your salary, or maybe unlimited time off is more important than your salary, and that's totally fine. But try to figure that out before you go into the interview so you can have that in the back of your mind, because if you don't think about that before you go into the interview, it's really easy to just get overwhelmed in the moment and be like, yes, I'll take it, and then, you know, not have that leverage waiting in the wings. So there's a whole wonderful workshop you can take on this. It's run through the American Association of University Women. We've co-sponsored with them in the past, and I super, super recommend it. I'm hoping that we'll be able to offer it online, and it's really, really great. So there's a whole set of resources on that, but I would just say, number one thing is think about what is that minimum amount of money you're willing to accept. And again, this might vary from job to job, or company to company, or even within your own life, and that is okay, but just think about that. So there's some questions in here. How much of the requirements when looking at jobs should you know, like percentage-wise? So there's a really interesting statistic on this, which is that women will only apply to a job if they feel that they meet 90 to 100% of the criteria. Men will apply to the job if they know, I believe it's either 60 or 50%. So a really important consideration is that most job postings are actually quite aspirational. They're going to exhaustively list things that people may or may not be using. Sometimes the job posting even contains information that's false or was, you know, obtained third hand. Oftentimes the people writing the job postings are not technologists. So it's really important to take the job posting with a grain of salt. I would say it's all in context. If you're applying to be a senior backend Java developer and you've never written any Java, that might be a harder sell. If it says, you know, you're applying to be a front-end engineer and it says you must know Angular, but you know React, apply. It's all within context. So I don't think there's a hard percentage. If you have none of the skills and you don't feel that you would be able to achieve them within like, you know, I don't know, 1 to 3 month window, I would say maybe don't apply. But overall, err on the side of applying. What you mostly have to lose is time, right? So, and if you don't have a lot of time, then yeah, you're gonna wanna be a little bit more thoughtful. But don't, if you meet like several of the criteria, like, and you want the job, like apply. There's a question, what about someone who is entry level asking the type of salary? There's a ton of resources out there for finding out what the salary of current employees at companies are. So there's Glassdoor, there's Indeed, even LinkedIn I think has one now. There's another great website called levels.xyz, which has salaries for a lot of tech companies. Now, please bear in mind that salary is going to vary widely by geography. So if you're a remote employee or if you're applying, you know, if you live in the middle of the country, you're not going to make as much money as someone who lives in San Francisco. But I would say try to do as much homework as you can before you talk to the company about what the salary expectations are. You can try to ask the recruiter, but I would advise you to be very careful because they're going to turn it back on you and say, well, what do you want? And that's not the position you want to be in. So as much as you can, because you really want them to cast the first stone, right? Like you want the first conversation about money to be when they're going to be offering you a job, because you never know if you're off by $10,000 to $20,000, right? If you ask them for $100,000 and they're prepared to offer you 110, you just cheated yourself out of $10,000. So I would say, oh yeah, Caroline, great idea. Never give that figure until you get the salary range. Yeah, recruiters can be sketchy for sure. Yeah. You have to remember that an in-house recruiter is looking to save the company money, right? So yeah, something to keep in mind. There's a difference between contract and consulting company salaries versus product company salaries. Yeah, that's a great point. The contract and consulting company salaries are going to be lower. What do you do if the job application asks for a figure range? That's a great question. Put $0 if you can. Yeah, try not to throw the first stone as much as possible. All right, we're going to talk more about money in a little bit, so I want to keep going. Okay, great. So you're going into the interview. You're super nervous. What do you do? So as much as you can, be friendly and try to relax. Obviously, saying try to relax to someone who's not relaxed is not generally effective, but you should try to lead into the interview with the approach that you got this far. So you should be proud of yourself, and you should be, hopefully you're excited about talking to the company and learning more and sharing more about yourself. You also want to be humble, but also confident. So this is a very delicate line, right? So I think for women, oftentimes we're more humble than confident. But yeah, there's definitely that line between being a know-it-all, cutting people off, versus, not sharing your accomplishments or not being excited. So it's a very delicate balance, but you want to be friendly, you want to be professional, and you want to be confident. Definitely make sure that you have a professional demeanor and appearance. You don't want to swear. I mean, I've had some horror stories. Try to get a read on what the sort of level of formality of the company is from the recruiter. You can ask, like, what would you suggest for a dress code or whatever. Most tech companies are very casual. I've had people like wearing yoga pants. Like it kind of depends. But if you're working at, like, if it's a bigger company or it's in government or healthcare, they might be a little more formal. So try to match it, and obviously, like, make sure you have a good Zoom background if you're doing an online interview. Practice answering the questions. So it's really important to have answers that you've thought about. You don't want to memorize them, but you want to think about your answers before you go into the interview, so you're not speaking totally off the cuff. Show up a little early. This is more for in-person interviews. Show up a little early. Don't show up like 20 minutes early. It's such a nightmare. Like, no one's ready. Everyone's running around. It's really awkward. Just show up like 10 minutes early is fine. Show your passion for the company and the space and the problem they're trying to solve. Like, even if you're not like an outwardly enthusiastic person, whatever you can do to convey your potential excitement for the job. And if you're not excited about the job, that's okay too. You don't have to be excited about the job, but try to identify things that you feel good about the job or about the company, and try to put the focus on those things. Listen when the interviews are talking. I can't tell you how frustrating it is to spend an hour with someone and like go over something, and then they ask a question about it like 10 minutes later, and you're like, we already talked about this. So try to listen. Obviously, you're spending way more time in the process than the interviewers, but the interviewers are also spending their time, so you want to be really thoughtful about their time as well. And then this is really classy, I think, and this is a personal opinion, but sending a really brief thank you email is really nice. You don't need to send it to every single person you talk to, but you want to send it to the hiring manager, the recruiter, if there is someone you really connected with. I think it's a really nice move. Please don't request to be connections on LinkedIn immediately the same day that you interview with someone. It's very awkward if you don't get the job. Just quick classy email saying thank you. I really appreciated talking about XYZ. If you connected over a particular topic, you can refer to that. I think it's really nice. how should you look on the camera? How should you look at the camera in an online interview? I've heard mixed advice about this. Whew, that's hard. And I'll be honest, I don't have a ton of experience with online interviews. I think that in general, you want to, your body language, your facial expressions, your tone of voice matter so much more in a lot of ways when you're on camera, right? Because people are just like looking at your face. They're not looking at the table. They're not looking around. So I think you should look at the camera. Hopefully you have the person's head under the camera. So it looks like you're looking at them, but it's not always possible. I mean, I would also say, like, don't read into it too much. We're all trying to adapt to this process, and I think no one's going to expect you to be like a perfect on-camera interviewee. I haven't heard mixed advice about that, but would be curious to see what that is. There's another question: what do you do if the job application asks for a figure or range? Did I already answer that? I would say, as much as possible, try to put like $0. You could put like 0 to $1 million. Like, try to avoid putting a number in there before you have a job offer as long as you possibly humanly can. And if you have to put a range and the minimum is like a reasonable, put as big of a range as you can, where the minimum is like 10% higher than your walkaway number and the maximum is like, I don't know. Is it possible you overdress for an interview? This is a personal opinion thing. I will say I once interviewed someone at a startup, and he came in wearing a wool suit in the middle of the summer, and he was doing a whiteboarding interview, and he was just sweating bullets, and it was so horrible, and I felt so bad for him. It didn't make me like think less of him, but it was just unfortunate and awkward. So I would say, yeah, kind of in technology, especially in like startups and stuff, I feel like if someone's very formally dressed, they might come across as just like they don't really know what's going on, or they might appear like out of touch. So yeah, I would be really thoughtful about that. If you're doing Zoom interviews, you can't go wrong with just like a nice blouse if you're a woman, or like a button-down shirt if you're a man. You probably don't need to wear a tie unless you're like at a government contractor or something. With this pandemic happening, what is your thoughts on a career change or getting a remote position? Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, this is a really, really tough time. The job market, even here in Boston, has taken, a really, really hard hit. I think as much as you can, try to make connections with people, try to make your inquiries meaningful, join community Slack channels, whatever you can do to make a connection with a company is going to make you a much more exciting candidate, and you're going to stand out and people are going to remember you. So try to make that personal connection. Melissa says, as someone who works remotely and has done video interviews, don't make it obvious that you're in your pajamas. Put on a shirt. Also recommend against workout gear. Yeah, that's probably smart. What do you do if the interviewer isn't the most professional? What do you do if they're late or wearing informal attire? Yeah, that's rough. That's a pet peeve of mine. Like, the least the interviewer can do is make it a comfortable and pleasant experience for you. To me, that speaks of negligence on kind of the company level. Like, they should have a wrangle on that. I would say, try to give them the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, if there's some red flags there, like, don't ignore them. If they're really late, they should be very apologetic. If they're not, like, maybe think really carefully about, if this is a company you want to work for, and try to get as much information as you can just from online. Like, other people talk about the interview process all the time. Sometimes people that talk about the interview process, like especially on Glassdoor, they're very negative because they didn't get the job. So you have to take that into consideration too, right? The sample size is kind of biased, but try to get as much intel as you can. In terms of sending thank you emails, if you only have the contact for one person, like the internal recruiter, should you send it to them, or should you ask for a way to contact other people during the interview? Sometimes they give business cards, but not always. Yeah, so if someone gives you their business card, that's fair game, right? Like, they're basically saying, here, contact me. If you really want to, I think it's acceptable to ask the recruiter. I can't speak to the recruiter's opinion on that. Every time I've gotten like a thank you email from a candidate, I always think it's really nice. So it's an opinion thing. I would say use your judgment. If the recruiter seems like really frazzled and like doesn't have time, maybe not. But you might also be able to reach out to the person, like you might be able to guess their email. A lot of company emails are just like first name dash last name at blah, blah, blah. So you can try that as well. But you might also end up in the spam filter. So I have email addresses for the whole team I just had an interview with. I've only exchanged emails with the team lead. Can I send my thank you to the email to the whole team, or should I just stick to sending it to the team lead? That's a really great question. I don't know. That's a good one. I would say if you feel like you really bonded with the team, you could send it to the whole team. You could also say something to the team lead and just say like, please extend my thanks to your whole team, or like, please extend my gratitude, blah, blah, blah. Like you could kind of frame it that way, and then hopefully they would like forward it or like mention it to the team. Is it wrong to guess their email? I've done that before. I wasn't sure if that was wrong. That's a great question. I don't know. I know a lot of like marketing and sales type people do that all the time, and I guess that's not normally met with such a claim. I think as long as you're not, you know, if you're trying to send them an email to thank them for their time, like if I didn't give someone my email but they still sent me an email, I would be like, oh, that's nice. I don't know, as long as you're not creepy about it. Cool. All right, we are a little bit over time. We have just a few more slides left. So I'm going to try to go through them really quickly. When you're talking in your interview, this is the part where you take your professional narrative that we talked about a while back, and this is where you want to let it shine. So these are all questions that you should use to incorporate into that dreaded question, tell me about yourself. Tell me about yourself is not an exhaustive history of everything that you've ever done and everywhere that you've ever worked. And tell me about yourself is basically your opportunity to frame your entire narrative in the interview. So thinking about the context of the job, the company, the role, try to think about making connections between the stuff that you have done or the stuff that you know and the stuff that this company wants. So these are some of the questions that you can consider. How do you learn? How have you skilled up? Maybe you don't meet on paper all the qualifications for this job, but can you talk about times when you have skilled up, learn something really fast, learn something really well, and talk eloquently about those? What strengths and experiences brought you to where you are, which is sitting in front of this interviewer, applying for this job? So again, the keyword here is relevance. You want to think about what is the relevant strength and experience that this person that's sitting across from you wants to hear about you in the context of the fact that you're being interviewed. What will you add to the team? The reason why they're hiring is because they need more people. They probably don't want carbon copies of the people that already exist on the team. So going back to that question of like, what makes you special? You really want to say, this is an ad for the team, right? These are unique qualities that I am bringing to your company. And maybe you don't know what the team makeup is, so maybe that's a hard thing to consider. But if there's things that made you special in another team, they'll probably make you special on this team as well. Other questions that are really important for developers to, be ready to answer or think about is, how do you manage your time? How do you communicate? And how do you prioritize? These are kind of I want to say they're underrepresented skills because they're really important skills, but oftentimes when people prepare for interviews, they're only thinking about the tech. And these are things that make you a really valuable team member as an engineer. And so you really want to think about examples, specific examples of how you do these things. Also, as we mentioned before, if you have gaps or inconsistencies in your history, you might be asked about them. Be ready to talk about them. You want to approach them, with sort of openness and like sensitivity. If one of the gaps was like family stuff, like that's okay. You can say that, like, I was dealing with a family matter or whatever, like language you want to use, that's okay. And the interviewer should not pry, but just be ready to talk about these things if there's like, very large gaps in your resume. yeah, have specific personal examples as much as you can. Again, data. Think about the data. All right. This is a big one. Please be honest about your weaknesses. I know everyone hates the question, like, what's your weakness? But it's really important to have a good answer for that because it shows that you're a self-aware person. Someone who says that my weakness is I work too hard. I mean, you could argue, yeah, that is a weakness. I burn myself out. Yeah, I guess that is a weakness. But you want to have a little bit more self-awareness than that. So you want to think about what are the things that you're working on and frame it as an area for growth. So if you can say like, sometimes I have trouble with time management, here's a system that I put in place to, help me manage my time better. I started using this time tracking app and, I've improved my productivity by blah, 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 blah. So try to think about your weaknesses in context. If the job is, being a release manager and you break prod all the time, like maybe don't say that's your weakness, but just be thoughtful about it and don't like come up with a BS one because they'll know. What if you voluntarily left a job because you felt uncomfortable or there was unfairness among a team? They ask why you're out of work. That's a great question, and unfortunately this happens to a lot of people. So I would say as much as possible, try not to get into specifics. Come up with, there's all different kind of creative ways you can frame this, but you can just say like, I'm looking for a workplace that values communication, or like basically take your bad experience and try to frame it as like you're being proactive about this like kind of specific problem that you have without trash talking or talking poorly, or even if you were harassed or you had a really horrible experience, which is a very real thing, the interview is not the time to talk about it. So I would say as much as possible, try to say like, I'm looking for something different, or I'm looking, and the interviewers know what that means, but you don't want to get into that kind of conversation because it's a really hard conversation for people to have. And it's, and even though your story is like very valid and it's important, if you want to share that story with other people, you definitely should, but like the interview is not necessarily the right place. So this is a list of common questions. I really encourage you to have good answers for all of these if you haven't thought about them. Just have answers, don't memorize them. I think talking about challenges is really good. Being able to talk about negative feedback, talking about, how you show up, how you hustle, how you grow. These are all really, really good things. You want to have examples of these things. You can't speak in generalities. You really want to have examples. So just practice with your friends and family. Let's see. How do you frame being laid off? That's a really great question. Listen, layoffs happen to everyone. I would say, if they ask you why you left and you were laid off, you can say, I was laid off. It was really unfortunate. Don't lie about it, obviously, but you don't have to volunteer that information. They might not even ask you. So it's kind of on you to decide how you want to do it. Companies can call the former employer and ask like about the circumstances that you left, but most of the employers won't even necessarily talk about it anymore because a lot of times it opens them up to lawsuits. So I would say like, don't volunteer the information, but if you ask, you can just say like, hey, I was laid off. It's really unfortunate, but I'm really excited to take this, pivot the conversation quickly as much as you can. What if a prior manager who harassed you will badmouth you? Whew. Yeah, I would say, I hope that doesn't happen to you. I know that these things happen. I also know that there is a lot of lawsuits and things that happen as a result of those conversations. So if that manager knows what's good for them, they're not going to do that. Again, if it's a really bad employment circumstance, you could consider leaving that job off your resume. But that's a really tough one. If anyone has experience in HR, I would like to know what the proper answer to that is. That is a super tough one. Should you fill in the box with in the application with the reason why you left a particular job? If you have to, I would just make it as vague as possible, especially on an application form, to say like, looking for new opportunities. Just be as vague as possible. If they really want to know, they're going to ask you about it in the interview. And it's not going to disqualify you. No one's ever gotten disqualified for looking for new opportunities from their previous job, I don't think. All right, last slide. Don't. These are don'ts, and a lot of these are informed by my personal opinions. This is another one of the best pieces of advice that was ever given to me, which is that please don't say that you're junior. And I will tell you why. As soon as you say that you're junior, there's a whole set of preconceived notions that someone's going to make about you, about your maturity, about your experience level, about your skill, about what they should pay you. Let the person who's assessing you decide if you're junior or not. If your title was junior, you can leave it on your resume, but don't just lead with junior, because I just think a lot of people sell themselves short. And I'm sorry, if you've been writing code for like more than 3 years, you're not junior, or even 2 years in a lot of places. Like, so yeah, I mean, use your judgment, but I would never recommend anyone present themselves as junior. Another one is, please don't say that you're nervous in the interview. I know that's like the most natural instinct in the world, but what you're doing is you're taking the focus of the interview off of you and onto your nervousness. So just don't say it if you can. Practice not saying it. It just changes the energy. We mentioned this a little bit before, but please don't show your hand when it comes to money. You want them to give the first number. It's like in any sales negotiation strategy, whatever conversation, let them throw the first number. I will tell you, when I was applying for my current job, I let them tell me the first number, and it was more than I was going to ask for. So it's really, really good help. It's a helpful tip. And again, I want to plug that American Association of University Women workshop. It's great. I think they are going to offer it online, so definitely check that out for salary negotiation tips. Please don't talk poorly about past employers. The tech world is really small. If you live in Boston, Boston is a small city. You don't know who knows who, you don't know who worked where. Just try to be as classy as possible. Even if you had a bad experience, just save it. Please don't use too much jargon. Sometimes people think that like this makes them more impressive. It just comes off as really like disingenuous. Obviously, if you're in a technical interview, you should talk about the technologies. You should use the correct terms for things, but don't just like pepper your language with jargon just to do it. It's really obvious when people are doing that, especially if you don't know what the words mean. Please don't use words you don't know about. Also, definitely never misrepresent your experience or lie. Karma, it's not good. Just don't do it. And please don't be late or unprepared for the interview. Make an effort as much as you can. And again, like this is weird times, right? It takes a lot to interview when everything is going really well. So it takes a lot to interview right now, and I think interviewers are very understanding of that. But as much as possible, try to show up for the time that you're interviewing and be professional. There's a question here. If the offer is more than you had asked for, do you continue to negotiate? That is such a good question. So of course your instinct is like, oh, okay, sure. But if you take the AAUW workshop, what they will tell you is oftentimes at companies, the first offer is not the last offer. So if you feel comfortable, you can ask for X% more. Or you could ask for a signing bonus, or you could ask for relocation assistance, or you could ask for a transit reimbursement. Like there's other things that you could add on to your negotiation within reason, right? If it's a tiny startup and they have no money, like maybe ask them for some extra vacation days. Like you want to use your judgment, but you also don't want to leave money on the table, and you don't want to walk away from from an opportunity to get more, right? Because also the number that you get might be the number that you have for a while, right? You don't know what the salary, promotion, bonus is going to be. So yeah. All right. So important to remember, interviewing is a two-way street. We have only about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try to go pretty quickly through here. Some things for you to consider as you go through the interview process. I want you to really consider, can you see yourself there? Do you feel like you could be a part of the team? If you are the only woman or you're the only person of color in the room, this can be really, really hard. And I don't want you to brush that off. Like, I want you to acknowledge those feelings, and those are very real feelings. But are these people welcoming? Are these people accepting? Are these people that you think you could work with for potentially the next few years? You got to have a conversation about that with yourself. Future team dynamics. Yeah. So do you trust them? Were they nice to you? Do they seem happy? If people are nice but miserable, it's probably not a good sign. What's the career trajectory here? And you should ask about this in the interview too. You know, if being promoted is really important to you, you should try to get a sense of what opportunities exist for promotion at the company. What resources do you need? Is this company going to give you the resources that you need to succeed? This might be money, this might be other things. It might be a budget for education. It might be help with childcare. It might be a shorter commute so you can spend more time with your family. It might be, I don't know, emotional support by your team. Like, just think about what you as a person need and try to assess how much this company can fill that for you. What are the biggest risks, both for you in taking the job and for the company as a whole? If you have doubts about the company's business model and you're not in a position where you want to be unemployed in a year, like, that's really real. So if you're applying at a startup, like, Google them, like, look at the Crunchbase, like, just see, you know, does this place seem like a viable place to work? And then finally, this goes back to resourcing, but like, is the compensation fair for the amount of work that you're going to put in, and does it meet the need that you have? So don't sell yourself short. It's really important. There's a question for somebody who's trying to switch careers and transition to becoming a software developer. Do you recommend boot camps to get them the experience and the skills for jobs? So I can't blanket recommend boot camps because I think that boot camps are very effective for very specific people, and they vary very, very much. So there's all different kinds of boot camps. There's in-person boot camps. There's online boot camps. There's some that are very competitive. There's some that anyone that can pay just gets in. I would say for me, I did a boot camp, and it was a really great kick in the butt for me. It was what I needed to basically take my sort of like hobbyist mentality around coding and like taking part-time classes and get my butt into gear and get me ready for, you know, my first tech job. But also you have to remember that you're not going to get all the skills you could possibly get in 3 months or 4 months. What you're going to hopefully get out of a boot camp is the ability to learn. You're going to get the ability to work really hard and understand how to prioritize things. But it's not a magic wand, and it's not a guarantee. All right, one last piece. So a lot of companies talk a lot about fairness and diversity, but there's a couple of really important things that you should know. It is illegal in the US for interviewers to ask you about all of these different attributes. So they should not be asking you about these things in the interview. If they do, you do not have to answer them. I hope that they don't ask you, but you should just say you don't feel comfortable answering the question. These are all protected statuses and categories of things by the US Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that you should not be asked about. An interesting one is the last one, so salary history. So in several states, including Massachusetts, California, New York, and Illinois, it's actually illegal for a potential employer to explicitly ask you about your salary history, which is a really great thing, because what this means is that you get to basically, you're not biased toward what you were getting before. So you basically get to decide how much money you're going to ask for, or how much money you're going to respond with when they make you an offer. So this is a really great thing. A a lot of other states have this law. So please just check the laws of the country and the state that you're applying in around all these things. But this is really good. This is protection for you. Also, please note, they are able to ask you, are you legally eligible to work in the US? They're also able to ask you, are you fluent in English? So if there's things that are specific to the job, they can ask you, but they can't just blanket ask you about these things. All right, closing words of encouragement. We have about 5 minutes left. The thing I really want you to remember for all of the women in this group is that women have always been programmers. And in fact, the first woman was a programmer, Ada Lovelace, in 1840. She worked on the earliest computer. And I think sometimes it's really easy to lose sight of that in an industry where women and people of color have been pushed out. But it's really important that to realize that they have played an integral role in the formation of everything that we have today around computing. So Katherine Johnson, she was an incredible mathematician at NASA in the 60s. Her story is in Hidden Figures. Margaret Hamilton, she helped land the first person on the moon. Tracy Chow today, she not only has become an incredible advocate for diversity and transparency in companies around diversity issues, but she was a founding engineer at Quora and Pinterest. So just remember that there's a long line of women before you and a long line of women ahead of you, and you're in the right place. Another really important thing, and this is especially pertinent right now in the time that we're living in, is to be nice to yourself. You work really hard, you got to this point in your life, and realize that there's a lot of things that you can't control. And self-care is really essential. So you need to be nice to yourself and take care of yourself. Another thing that's important to remember is most things aren't forever. So sometimes you're not sure about a job, but you really need it and you're going to take it, and you have to assess, try to give it a couple of months, see if you like it. If you hate it, try to find something else. I think sometimes we get really caught up on how much we want something or how much we want something to be perfect. And the reality is most things aren't forever. And especially employment in the tech industry today, it's very common to see people with 12 months or less on their resume and they're bopping around, and that's just kind of expected. So keep that in mind. Trust your gut. I think as women, especially, we're socialized to have a really good spidey sense. Be really, really aware of that red flag. Don't ignore it. If someone's offering you something that is too good to be true or something is sketchy, pay attention to it, do research on it. Yeah, your life experience is oftentimes really, really helpful. And then lastly, it's really important to remember that failure is the only way that we can really improve. And this is really hard. This is a really hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. We're not socialized to fail. There's a really, really great podcast by the founder of Girls Who Code, which is a separate organization for women who code. But she talks about that, especially for women, we're raised to be perfect, whereas men, a lot of times boys in the US are actually raised to be brave. And so as a lot of times for women, they feel less comfortable taking risks because we feel a lot of undue pressure. And especially if you're the only, right? Like you feel pressure to, represent other people. And it's really unfair. But one of the piece of advice I can just, my best advice I can give to you is to realize that failure is a stepping stone, and sometimes it hurts and sometimes it's horrible, but it's going to help you in the long run. Okay, so we have a couple more questions in the chat, and if you have more, we've got just a couple of minutes left here. So we have a question: could it make sense as a woman to volunteer some of my personal information regarding kids in order to show that I do not have toddlers, in order to lower the risk of prejudice due to that? I would say no. I would not volunteer any information about your family, especially not in the interview process. They should not be asking you specific questions about your family. Discrimination is real, it happens, and it's super messed up. But I would not offer I would not proactively offer it out. Yeah, you can say like, you know, if you're returning to the workforce, you can say that. Like you can say, you know, I took some time off to care for my family, but I would not get into specifics. And again, this is my opinion, but I would just say overall, like as much as possible to steer the conversation toward your skills. What do you recommend to someone who wants to get started as a software developer or engineer and does not have any experience or skills in the field? So we are living in a time of online learning. I think as much as possible, trying to find education resources online is a really, really great way to start. Getting involved in a project. So if you can find other people that are also learning, that can be a really great way to get your, you know, have an accountability buddy or someone that you can work with to work on your skills. I think creating, you know, saying like, I'm going to create an app, right? Like come up with something that you think is really interesting and you're excited about. I think that's a really great way to learn is hands-on. And then of course, you know, reading, watching conference talks is a really awesome way to learn about what other people are doing. You'll probably learn about fields or specialties you've never even heard of. There's a million different conference talks on YouTube. And then resources like forums, obviously like Hacker News, Reddit, lots of other areas where they talk about like kind of cutting edge technologies that might be interesting. There's so much available. So yeah, I would just say like, try to think about why you want to get into software development and come up with either like a project or kind of a targeted objective that will help you focus your studies. Because it's also really easy to get overwhelmed to be like, I need to learn HTML and CSS and JavaScript and MySQL and AWS, and like, no, just pick one thing to start out on, and you know, try to make your goals incremental. Let's see. And thank you guys. Thank you all for joining us. Someone recommended RSA 2020 recorded most of their conference presentations for February, and it's so helpful as a student. That's awesome.
Hey everyone, I just want to remind you all that we are sending out a link to the deck after this on Meetup. So if you missed any of the content, just check it out on the event page or check your emails.
All right, I think that's a wrap. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and we hope that you can join us for some more Women Who Code events in the future. Have a great night, everyone.